fantastic crowd. This is a moment in which we wish we will have a better and bigger Center for Latin American Studies. I guess space is becoming a problem, which shows that we have a lot of interest in today's presentation. So let me start by introducing Catherine Tucker, because you will go first, right?
Right.
So Catherine Tucker is an anthropologist. She's a full professor in the Department of Anthropology in the center. She has a long trajectory of work on sustainability, community-based forests, and coffee production. She's working on a new book. And so I think I will. Okay, so thank you, Catherine. I guess I'm going to introduce Tatiana also at the same time. Tatiana Avignone, she's Italian, but she is a professor at the University of Loyola in Córdoba and Seville in Spain. She's working on a PhD in inclusive sustainable development. And she was also a social worker who has been working on migration for many years. Thanks so much for everybody for being here, and I will be quiet now.
Well, boy, thanks everyone for coming on a Friday afternoon. It's like the hardest time for people to decide to hang around and stay a little bit longer. So we had a really nice introduction. I just want to mention that one of the reasons that Tatiana is here is because we have a memorandum of understanding with the Universidad Loyola Andalucía, which was signed in January of 2020. If that rings any bells, you know it was right before the pandemic. And so all of our plans for collaborations kind of evaporated for about 2 years. And so last April, the university and my colleagues there invited me to come and visit and give a seminar and meet a few people. I think I met 50 professors in the university between their two campuses in Cordoba and Sevilla. And it was wonderful. And one of the groups that I really hit it off with was the migration group, which is now culminated in Tatiana coming here to visit us. And for a week, her advisor, Gloria Fernandez Pacheco, was also here. And so today, each of us is going to tell a little bit about our work and link it to migration. And we are then going to tell you about some of our ideas for collaborations. And one of the things that we are hoping for is to maybe find some students and colleagues who would like to collaborate with us as we think about what are some of the things that are happening with migration between the sending areas of the Sahel and all of Latin America, with Latin America coming mainly to the United States and people from the Sahel going mainly to Europe, and particularly Tatiana's worked in Spain. Although now, very interestingly, there's also a path from the Sahel through Mexico to the United States. So there's some really interesting possibilities for collaborations and study. But first, I wanted to give you an idea of some of my background and how I got to be here, because I didn't start studying migration. In fact, it's something that's fairly recent, or it's kind of been a little bit in the background for a while. But I started by studying community forestry. And then the people started cutting down the community forest they had really fought hard to keep to plant coffee. And then that led to a whole series of changes in how they were relating to their forests, to their water, to their land, and to each other, and to markets. And led me to ask some questions, not only about coffee, but about how land cover was changing, how relationships in the community were changing, how they endeavored to protect successfully and surprisingly a watershed reserve that provides water for a whole municipio and actually parts of 3 others. And then watching through the crisis of coffee that happened from 1999 to 2003, how people were coping and adapting, and then shifted rapidly to forming cooperatives and seeking certifications to sell quality coffee. And as this is happening, we also start to see a rise in migration. So I've looked at a bunch of different questions I'm not going to go through that relate to those topics. The thing that is perhaps of most interest here is thinking about what's happening with coffee and how that relates to migration processes. So I've been actually fairly consistent in the kinds of theoretical approaches that I've taken, but over time they've increased, and so now environmental justice and decolonization approaches have become really relevant to my work and also deeply inform the way I'm looking at coffee and cooperatives, and also now as I start to think about migration. So I've used a lot of methods over time. I continue. I just want to kind of like wave my hand and say, I've never met a method I don't like. It all depends on the research question and the research context. But constants in my research have been participant observation, formal and semi-structured interviews, surveys, and whenever I can, I've also been collaborating with foresters and botanists and ethnobotanists and people who are looking directly at the environment to understand what's happening, because everything's tied together. And for these coffee producers, their lives are intimately connected to the land itself, to the water, to the trees, to the plants. And this is a very agro-biodiverse landscape. It's a landscape where people have lived here for a long time. This is a largely indigenous descended area. Many of the approaches they use are still informed by generations of knowledge of the land and the plants. So it's really interesting to look at how people are thinking about adapting as they face a number of big challenges. I have been focusing mainly on coffee for the past almost 2 decades now without leaving behind my other interests. But one of the things that really fascinates me and troubles me about coffee is its fundamental conundrum is that since the early days of colonialism, countries of the North have profited greatly from coffee. And there's also been a lot of effort to increase demand, and human beings haven't needed a lot of encouragement to drink caffeine. But at the same time, coffee, like a number of other commodities on the global stage, depends upon people who are willing to work or have no other options but to work for next to nothing. And that then becomes a driver of the whole series of complex and difficult relationships and challenges that continue to shape what happens for coffee producing households and indeed all of the nations of the global south that depend to some degree on producing and selling coffee. So here is just a recent list of the things that coffee farmers deal with every day, from uncertain prices to uncertainties from shocks and stressors from ongoing climate change. Many of you may remember that in 2020, 2 hurricanes, category 4 and 5, hit Honduras back to back within 3 weeks of each other, Eta and Iota. To this day, they have still not repaired all of the roads and bridges that were wiped out by those 2 successive hurricanes. Where I work, it's far enough from the coast that it didn't have to deal with the gale force winds, but we lost a lot of bridges and roads to landslides and to torrential rainfall. And probably Adira could tell you more about that. So in in this kind of context, people are under a lot of stress to make a living. They never know if they're going to earn enough from coffee to cover their costs. More to the point as well as they're in a country where there's a lot of civil unrest and insecurity and corruption and uncertainty on that regard, and increasing social strife and violence related to the actions of narco traffickers and gangs that have become more influential and present in the country. And as the civil, political, and economic stresses have increased in sync almost with environmental and climatic stresses, we also see then an increase in outmigration and potential and actually already viewed problems with the drain of people, not just a brain drain, but a labor drain. So that communities find it difficult to cover activities that they used to do together. And where I work, borders and forests and water systems are all maintained by community labor. And if a good number of the adult population is not present, then just meeting those basic maintenance activities becomes very difficult. And the government is not stepping in to help. So there's a lot of domino effects in this context. One of the first major systematic projects I did that started looking at the situation facing coffee producers was a multinational collaborative project with researchers from Mexico, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Honduras, and me. We chose 2 important coffee producing areas in each of the countries that were comparable in important ways. And we studied what was happening, what their coping strategies were. And this is relevant because this is where we first begin to track in a quantitative way what's happening with migration in a broader regional way. So I know this is too small to read, but we were hoping we would clearly see what's happening with adaptation. This is what works. What works is anything that fits the local needs. There is no pattern, and that's why it's resilient. These are very resilient communities, as it turns out. Half of them are largely indigenous in descent and origin, and they do all kinds of things. And in none of these is migration a major choice. It's present everywhere, but the most common thing was changing and adapting agricultural practices, looking for new ways to make a living off the land. And that begins to be things too, like finding certifications for things like coffee, but also in some places for cacao, and that's more recent. But 78% of all of the respondents, and there were 1,278, said that they had done something to make it work, to get through the stresses that they were facing. And so our take-home message was, wow, these people are really creative, they're proactive, and they're figuring things out. And the places that had the biggest problem were where there were massive government programs to try to address it. So Mexico rolled out a huge program to get people to plant citrus trees in the south and avocados in other places. And when those trees were mature and started producing, there were no markets. And those people were in deep trouble. But all of the communities where the people themselves figured out what to do, they were doing okay. But in Mexico, there were problems related to that big government program. And then more recently, I'm focusing on thinking about what's happening with cooperatives in these areas, because I mentioned that we start to see certifications happening, as well as a lot of diversity. But as we were going around and talking to all of these farmers, they kept saying, so I've heard you can get more money for coffee if you have a fair trade certification, or my coffee's organic anyway. Can I get a better price for that? Oh, you need the certification. How can we get it? And we're kind of like, well, there's, maybe we can find some people. There weren't a whole lot in 2005 to 2008. But today, all kinds of certifications. One of the co-ops I work with has 23 different certifications, which costs money to maintain, but they can sell coffee to any kind of buyer who wants any kind of certification. Young women entrepreneurs got the certification coffee for that. All right, so we've had, we see a lot of different things happening with these certifications, but they all have some challenges. Fair trade has been great because of its social premium, which gives money on top of the cost of coffee, so that communities can, oops, my past, did I miss it? Okay, well, we're actually wrapping up soon anyway. So the social premium can be used for anything that communities jointly decide what to do. It can even be used as money to go directly to farmers to meet their needs. But in all of the co-ops where I am working, they've used that social premium for health clinics, schools, teachers. They've used it for educational training. One has nutritional training and a waste processing facility. But we see there's a lot of difference across these cooperatives. And the benefits aren't evenly distributed, because the people who are most active tend to benefit more. But there's all kinds of interesting things going on that I'm still trying to understand. But in the past several years, I started this looking closely in 2018. Before the pandemic and after the pandemic, there's been a huge surge in migration. And all of the organizations, when I was there for my sabbatical last year, said that they were all facing problems because of lack of labor. They were bringing labor from Guatemala, but Guatemalan labor was also scarcer than usual, also because of out-migration. And I went back and tried to track what's happening in the place I know the best, because I started working in La Pampa in 1992, a preliminary dissertation visit, to see what was happening. And in 1994, I surveyed 106 households, basically all of the ones associated with the main town and its suburbs in La Pampa. 106 households, only one reported having someone in the United States. The rest hadn't even reported anyone trying. But there was a lot of migration, about 40% of the households, that was internal. And very often, young people went to work in the maquilas, they saved their money, they came back, they built a house and got married. And that was both men and women. In 2003, in the coffee crisis, when we had about 23% reporting migration, it's actually really interesting. Again, it was mainly still going to maquilas, but there was now like a trickle going to the US. By 2008, about 15% of the sample reported having someone going to the United States or trying. And then last year, I tried to go back and find these farmers. I didn't have time to try to track them all down because they were spread across a fairly large landscape. But of the 30, I went to the farms and then tried to find the people. And 28 of the farms I visited had at least one person in the United States. 3 of those 28, actually the whole family had left, and I was talking to a new owner or someone who was taking care of farm. That's 10% for 3 families, 10% of the population I found. And I'm guessing that some of the families and farms I couldn't find people for were also there. That's incredible. So one of the things that also came out is the amount of debt that everyone is carrying. And the people that I know personally who have migrated, every one of them had gotten to a point where they could not cover their debts and were afraid for many reasons. And so that's something that I haven't heard as much about, but debt is an integral part of life. And when you have interest rates that are between 12 and 25%, you end up paying a lot more. So there's a lot of reasons for people to go. There's reasons to stay, but ultimately I just kept feeling when I'm talking to people that they are betting on hope that it'll work out better next time. So we'll save the questions and go on to Tatiana's presentation. I'm sorry, I told you that was going to be a problem. I'm going to check out. There's one thing I'm going to need last part of our presentation. So go ahead and I'll be right.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for the presentation, Carlos, and Catherine too. Thank you for staying here with me. Well, I would like to explain really, really fast, I promise, as much as I can, about my research until now. I'm Italian, as you can understand from my accent, but I live in Spain for 10 years. And my research in Universidad Loyola Andalucía is about unaccompanied migrant minors, girls and boys in the south of Spain. I mean, Andalusia is in the south of Spain and is the territory where the youth normally arrive. Also, even though in the last 5 years, Canary Island is an important other destination. So the Canary Island is now the main receptor, main than Andalusia. But yes, let's talk about that. Well, my project is about the creation of a digital toolkit for the assessment of migrant minors in residential care. And we start focusing on a context where the legislation in Spain states that migrant minors and youth have the same rights in education, healthcare, and social benefit as the national youth. Okay, we started thinking about the best interest of the child, and we started to think about tools and resources, really practice to help residential center and care system because these minors are unaccompanied. They haven't their parents. So by understanding the risk situation that this youth can find in Europe, we thought that it was important to create effective practices for their social inclusion. So we started to analyze data, and we saw that 24% of the total arrival in Europe are children. And in this 24%, 28%, I mean, in a total of 90,000 of minors are girls, something that in Europe is not so studied. The situation of girls, youth girls that arrived unaccompanied in Spain, in the south of Spain. So the main receptor are Spain, Italy, Malta, Greece, and Cyprus. And these data are from the Organization of International Migration. So main question that we are asking, I mean, I talk about we because we are a team. So we analyze this approach from different discipline and the specialization, okay? So the first research question was, is there a gender-based analysis of an accompanied migrant minor in the literature and in the data too? So the objective was we would to shed light on gendered understanding of minors' migrations. The second question was about what are the risks and the protective factors in the social inclusion of these youth in residential care. For this reason, the objective was to create an algorithm about the machine learning technique, about the most predictive factors that can lead to predict the social exclusion. I mean, we would like to improve the social inclusion. So how can we predict the social exclusion? The third question was about human rights, because as we all know, which human right should focus in the intervention and could improve this social inclusion. So we analyzed also how and in which extent the violation of this human right could affect this social exclusion in Spanish context, I mean. And the last question was about their experience. I mean, we are talking about youth. So which stories are successful stories? We have an example, we have few examples of a successful story, and how can contribute to improve the positive narrative of migration phenomenon in youth perspective. So we analyze experience, challenges, and good practices with this youth. So we started with the research questions. So I would like to show you the methodology. For the first question, we used literature review and data analysis and statistics data analysis. For the second one, for the predictive power of the algorithm, we analyzed a sample. So we used quantitative methodology in residential care. For the third one, that was about human rights violation and their influences in the social inclusion, we used mixed methods. And for the last one, we used qualitative methodology to talk about the experience and the challenges and also the positive perspective of this migration phenomenon. So we use a theoretical framework that is a Suarez-Orozco framework. Is really important for us to take into account how youth integration go through an individual level, a microsystem level, and a political level and social context and the global force. I can't now go deeper in this explanation of the theoretical framework, but I really invite you, and I'm quite sure that some of you really already know this theoretical framework. So about the literature review, we recently published a scientific paper and where we found has a gender-based analysis of an accompanied migrant minors underlines like a triple invisibility. I mean, they are in some case, they are girls, they are minors, and they are migrants. So there are like a triple level of an invisibility. And we identify differences between girls and boys in needs, social needs, characteristics, risk and protective factor. And also we try to categorize and also systematize these gender-related variables. Also, we proposed operationalization of measurement with instruments, tools that residential care could use to focus more in gender perspective. This is in children and youth review. And this was the first question. The second one was about the digital tool and the creation of an algorithm with machine learning. So we had the data of 209 minor, but this digital tool is for social professional, okay? I mean, this is the interface of the digital tool. This is the area where the digital tool is divided, but the creation is for the professionals, I mean, social worker, psychologist, directors, social integrator, mediator, intercultural mediator, that could use this application to improve the social inclusion of the minor in their residential center. When I'm talking about a residential center, I mean a really small residential center. They could be 10, 12, 15 youth at maximum. So they are really small family context. They try to create a family context as they can. So we identify in these different areas, educational, social, psychological, emotional, and legal area, 24 out 300 variable like the most predictive in risk and protective factors. And these 24 items are really the most important that can predict that youth could leave a social exclusion situation. Okay. In another part of the same study, quantitative study, we centrated our attention in the human rights, because this toolkit includes some items specifically on human rights. So we saw, this is a paper that I'm working on. This is a video that you can find in YouTube. We don't have the time to project this video now, but you can just ask to our Congress conference. We found the name was In the Best Interest of the Child, a study of an accompanied minor in a gateway to Spain. We saw how children only occasionally know their rights. And the part of, I mean, most interesting, sometimes more sad, well, sadder, was about that the items relate to the right of no discrimination and the access to resources, and about the gender identity was the most unknown, okay? And our objective was the formulation of the question are because we would like to verify not only whether children are aware of this right, but also if these rights are internalized in their thought and behavior patterns. So how these children could exercise actively these rights. This is more or less the results. And for the qualitative part, we published a book about good practices. This is the editorial Comares, but there is a copy in the library here in the university. It is in Spanish, and is about the perspective of the professionals. I mean, we conducted 15 semi-structured interview to the social worker, psychologist, educator, and all the professionals that are working with this youth. And they underline how the reciprocity was for them important to build itinerary of social inclusion. So it was an exchanging of good practices in terms of education, work, stability, family, and they talk a lot about the importance of taking into account the youth perspective in their intervention. And the last study was about the girls and about the professionals. So it's about their experiences, about their thought. So I just put here some quotes because I think they are quite interesting. One social worker said, "I am like a lantern. I will mark you, I will help you, but you have to walk the path yourself. So in this sense, they try to give them the tools, but they let them to internalize these tools in their behavior to empower them. And I say that this is really funny because I say that my 3 goals with them are to get them to get a partner, that I don't see them anymore, and that they invite me to their wedding. It's like, so you need a partner, or you can find a partner because you are included in my society. You don't need to see me anymore because you don't I'm not useful for you because you can't have the responsibility to your life without me, and that you can invite me to your wedding is because I'm a reference for you. I'm a meaningful person. So I really like this quote. And the last study that is in progress is about the girls. The one quote said, "I don't want this for my daughter because this is what I have experienced." So they talk about reciprocity and intersectionality. We interviewed 11 young women. They have 20, 21 years old. They arrived as minors in Spain. And we interviewed them, talking about how they feel in Spain, how it is being a 18 years old girl in their city of origin and in Spain, about what helped them to be the girl that are today, and how they describe themselves, and also what could advise to other girls that arrive in Spain alone. So about their expectation and some difficult and enjoyable moments. And just a few quotes, they said, "I'm studying law. I would like to help women in the country to give them more perspective than everything is about getting married or having children. And there are other way to go through our lives like woman." Or another quote was about a girl that talked about the pressure of the community and family. And she said, "I feel more like a woman in Spain. Their woman was nothing to do. So she gets married, she keeps her mouth shut and gets married. My father is different." She said, "My father is different." But things is that you have reached an age when people see you, everyone gets involved, they start to eat your father head off. So you know why I've left before. So it was like a different perspective. And another quote is about a girl, really difficult story. And she said, "The pain is in the heart, but now it doesn't hurt me. We are already in the future." So she identified the future in Spain. "I do things, I learn new things. It doesn't matter to me. My life goes little by little until I get what I want." So yes, these are just example of a young woman interview, and about summarizing my research in really few slides. And this is my group in Loyola Andalucía. Yes, is Gloria Fernandez was there until 2 weeks ago. Mercedes Torres, Eduardo Ibáñez, Maria Kubica, and Blanca Martin helped to do this research possible. So yeah, thank you very much for.
Sorry about that. Zoom. So we really appreciate your attention, and we have just a brief closing, a few slides to say where we think we're going as we try to think about how these really contrasting studies may lead us to some interesting threat. So these are some of our emerging ideas. Okay.
Yes, during these weeks with Catherine, we were talking about a possible overreaching research question, and we thought about the combination of push and pull factors are influencing migration decision from the global south to the global north, especially from Africa, that is more my perspective, to Europe and Latin America to North Africa, and also what roles do policies play? And another research question that we were talking about is about the why have migration flows been increasing in recent years? Can change or condition be identified? And also, what kinds of challenges do migrants, I mean, children, adults of all genders, face in their migration? During, preceding, and following from the global south to the global north. So we are talking about Europe and North America. But these are only three research questions that we tried to put in these slides, but should be others. So in this sense, we can discuss some more.
Yeah, and we're interested in your ideas too. So these are some of the comparative aspects that we are interested in considering. We know that motivations, expectations, and conditions play into it, that people have different intentions, whether they want it to be temporary or permanent or perhaps cyclical, as in the case of people who are agricultural laborers. We were discussing this, it's really interesting, it's very omnipresent in Spain and also in parts of the United States. We think that hope and resilience is really important in people's willingness to try to migrate. And there's not a whole lot about that. We don't know that policies influence in some ways, but we really aren't sure. Power position matters, and also routes are changing, which is creating new challenges.
We ask ourselves, how can we answer to these questions, to this different issue? And so we are quite convinced that the importance of mixing methodologies. As we have done already in our research, we use a literature review, examination of data, database, and qualitative research like semi-structured and informal interviews and survey questionnaire. But also, nowadays, participatory and art-based methods are quite important. So I don't use this type of method, but I'm quite interested on that. And we think that could be the new perspective also in future collaboration and research. So.
And we think also that it's really important to recognize the diversity of people's experiences. So our goal isn't just to make everything comparable or to quantify everything, although that is important, but also to understand this rich tapestry of experiences, and that may help us to both appreciate and understand why migrants come, why they stay, and the challenges that they face.
Yes, so next steps. We are trying to start this thinking about new researches and possible collaboration, but we would like to explore more possibility. Could be that some themes or thematics we leave behind, right? Or so we can just think about more colleagues that could be interested in migration on both sides of the Atlantic. So in this case, we are pleased to have more colleagues that could follow us in our starting research collaboration. Mm-hmm. And well, about the ideas, well, we were thinking about comparative analysis in motivation and in influences of policies, but in receiving country, but also gaps between policies and their implementation, including policies of youth and minors.
And then we were also thinking that because agricultural migrants are so important to the economies of both Europe and the United States, that also could benefit from a comparative assessment. And here, human rights dimensions are extremely important.
Yes.
And also in the next one.
Yeah, we.
Yeah,
yes,
we wanted to point out that
the more possibility of ideas. We have just wrote down 3, but we are open to suggestion and new idea, many possibilities, right? And
yeah, and we would like your comments and ideas as well. And if anyone is interested in studying and working on migration, then I think we'd like to know you. So we have some
relevant research.
Yeah, things that have been of interest to us and inspired us. Make it to the end, and on a Friday, it's wonderful that all of you seem to have stayed awake. You deserve a. Questions or comments? Yes.
Thanks to both of you. Amazing information. First question, well, just a few questions I have at this stage is about language and because as you know, international migration, especially from, let's say, from Africa to Europe, very politicized, right? And a lot of people, especially politicians nowadays, refer to this international migration as illegal migration, as clandestine. So even to the extent that a lot of the migrants themselves see themselves as just clandestine, as irregular migrants, right? But you know, Tatiana, you referenced the IOM. The IOM refers to, well, doesn't refer to this migration as illegal migration, rather irregular migration. But we have this discourse that creates that migrants, or the act of illegal migration is illegal. You criminalize it, then you also criminalize migrants, right? So the thing is that when people view themselves as criminal, they may not see themselves as worthy of having access to human rights. So do you think that, for example, perhaps changing the language from illegal migration to irregular migration assist in promoting the culture of human rights?
Yeah, I think I thank you for your question. It's really interesting. See your point. I agree with you because the language is a problem. Yeah. The language is a problem, and also we need to try to focus on the different migration and the different age of migration. In youth, you can't use irregular because they arrived and they have the documentation in Spain. In 3 months, they have the documentation, they can have residence, work, and educational access. So the legislation in the last 2 years has changed in this part, and for adults, just to come to the other age, now in this moment, the Congress of Spain are talking about a new legislation for regularize all migrants. They are living in Spain during a lot of years because they are working, they are resident, they are citizens. So yes, I think this recognizing of human rights is important in the both side for youth and the adults, and we need to change also the language definitely. Yeah, I don't know if I answered your question. Okay.
Oh, thank you. This is really fascinating research. And I like the idea of comparing, Latin America and Africa, and you have really identified some of these similar processes. And from the African side that I know the best, I think, looking at motivations, and it sometimes also depend on different areas. You have areas that have a long history of migration, where migration has become part of the culture, to a point where it is expected for people to do out migration. And I kind of see the same thing with the Senegal River Valley, where people have been migrating, way during the colonial period, because with the help of the French, who needed, labor in major plantations, peanuts and cacao plantations. So they were the first to kind of create that, initial move out of these rural villages. And the way they do it is people would, subsistent farmers, and they tax them and ask them to pay taxes in cash. And the only way you can get cash is to get involved in, labor migration. You have to go and get paid, and then you come back and pay taxes. But eventually, it becomes really, a habit for people who would move from that to kind of seasonal migration. You kind of notice within Honduras is similar in Africa. In Senegal, for example, people go from the rural areas to the capital city during the dry season, and then they would come back to farm during the rainy season. And then you have interesting, itineraries where people, when they do that for a few years, they would move out to a neighboring country, and then Central Africa, and from Central Africa, then to the United States or to Europe. But this is very different from the kind of migration you see now, that is coming predominantly from urban areas, and tied to some type of activities that were undermined by, many way Europeans. We take fishermen, for example, the people who are riding the boats are fishermen, but they cannot have any fish because the European boats come and take all the fish and go, and they don't find any more, enough fish to live on. And so they start becoming conveyors and recruiting people who want to go to Europe. So I think those aspects are really interesting to kind of address in looking at the motivations, beyond just the food and push factors, because they tend to be limited to economic kind of indicators, like the differential in salaries and some of these aspects. But there are more, I think, not obvious type of motivations that you might want to get in. And the youth is, you have the impression that everybody wants to exist because their predicament in a rapidly growing population in many of these places in Sahel, with the challenges of climate change, make it really hard for them to find hope for future in those places. But yeah, I would be happy to collaborate and, capacity.
So thank you. Rafa?
Well, first of all, thank you for this kind of like landscape analysis, right? That really connects these two regions. It makes me think a lot, and in thinking about future research questions or thinking about the geography of the migration. Something I've had conversations in my class is about the idea of the border, right? And so, thinking about Central America, depending on where migrants go, right? Like something that's in common with, say, North Africa and Spain is water as a border, right? And especially if we're thinking about Honduras, Central America, we think about if we're thinking about where, one of the hugest, unaccompanied minor Honduran populations are in South Florida. And so, just thinking about theorizing this idea of the water as a border, right? And the relationship that these migrants have crossing that. That's something that came to mind, but also in regards to geography is Central American migrants are crossing but staying in Mexico. So thinking about these routes, that sometimes the routes don't even end in the United States. They're ending in South Mexico. They're ending in tourist cities. In Mexico and all over these tourist areas, we're seeing migration from Brazilians, Colombians, right? They're settling. They're coming to Mexico, not coming to the United States. And it's not like they're using, because there's of course research out there that call Mexico the virtual wall, right? The virtual wall, the long wall, and this is like a term that's used by Central Americans, right? This is what they call it. So thinking about that, collaborating with maybe some, Latin American or Mexican scholars who are thinking about the settlement of Central Americans, and just thinking about also, right, really, when we're thinking about the policies that have been developed in Mexico, they're really backed by the U.S. It's U.S. funding that's really backing all the anti-immigration policies that are emerging in Mexico, especially in the South. And then I just want to say, Tatiana, we've had this conversation before about your work with young women in the residential centers. I think it's amazing. I shared with you that this is something my sister also works with, as she works with young people in foster care. What I'm really interested in your work is thinking about how does the toolkit, specifically that is being used to support these young women, right? These specifically African, women of color, at times Muslim women in Spain. How does it assist them, thinking about resilience and hope? How does it assist them to come to this idea of legal consciousness, right? Because they're within the system, they quickly learn how to navigate the system, navigate the state, navigate the policies. This is something we see in foster care youth. They're the most well-versed in their rights. So I'm wondering if if you have interest in tracking that, and thinking about how they mobilize the new rights that they have, that they've gained in the
Thank you for your comments and question. Where it's important to say that when the youth arrive to residential center, the problem is that have an age really near to the majority. 17. So they have just only a year to independence or for time of emancipation. So not only the residential care is important, but also the policies that the state give to them to their independence. So they know the state, the policies, social workers, they give them the opportunity to live in another facilities for young women. Okay, they arrived at 16, 17, and they don't have the time to actively exercise their rights. I mean, they can't have the time to learn the language. They can't have the time to finish their educational period. They can't have the time to find a job because they don't have the time to finish their educational period. So the important things that for exercising human rights, they have to add the access to the resources, because if not, they can't really understand how can exercise these rights. So the first thing is to give them the opportunity to have this access to resources until, we think, until 20 years old. Because they arrived really at the end of their adolescence. They don't have the time sometimes. And after that, they can have the time to, during our years and a half, in this new facility that they can live there during 1 year and a half, to find a job, to finish their education. And so they are empowered because they know better the society where they are living. So I think this is the first step in what I don't know if I exactly understood to your question, but I think it's important for them to exercise the rights actively, to have the time to adapt to the territory and access to the resources that they have for them. I mean, policies and government now is trying to build this type of resources. So they need the time to adapt to these resources and to know which are these resources. If not, they can't exercise actively their power. I mean, I think there's 2 more questions.
Maybe more of a comment or idea about motivations on migration, and maybe looking at the role that access to technology has to migration, because often what it happens, at least most recently, is that it only takes one person leaving for the entire family to follow behind.
Right.
And that's because communication is maintained, and like people can kind of take a sneak peek into living in another place through your phone or through a FaceTime call or through a WhatsApp, just maintaining that communication. I wonder how that plays out in unaccompanied minors, and whether or not they have access to keep contact with families, or is that a motivation to leaving, whether they're following friends or siblings. And yeah, that's
Yeah,
Thank you.
it's an important point of view.
Yes.
Your comments, because in my research also, in some data of the digital toolkit, where we saw 24 predictive risk and protective factors that are important for their social inclusion, one of them was that. I mean, the communication, the maintaining of the communication with their family, with their siblings, with their friends on the country of origin are a protective factor for them, even though they are living in Spain, even though they are living in another part of Europe. This type of connection is a protective factor for them. I can't have the possibility to go through in the 24 variable, but one was that. The connection and the links with the family, even though this family is in their country of origin.
Yeah, thank you. Abdul Karim from Burkina Faso. I have a few comments about the motivation. I think we two main factors, but I think they are the same. We have a certain form of insecurity and the lack of peace. I take the example of my country. And now, you note that two forms of migration. Internal migration, people who leave the village to come in the urban center where they think there are security, and people who live in the urban center who have money. They want to take their family to come in Europe because they are fear of the future. When you take the example of a country like Ivory Coast, I born there. It's a country where people don't trap like that. It's because of the civil war in this country. Many people left Ivory Coast to Western country. Another element I want to expose rapidly, my tribes, people of my tribes, we call it in Burkina Faso, Bisa. There are many in Italy and few in Espagne. They cultivate la tomate. Tomatoes. Yeah. But Burkina Faso, we have many land to plant tomatoes. Why they go to Italy? That's why I think when you ask the policies, I think it's very, very important because I think the government and the partner, we need to create an environment, an environment where they can do the same. I think, yeah, just a few comments for that, but I think it's a good study.
That's a really good point, that it's not just policies in the receiving countries, but also, you know, the policies in the sending countries, but also the conditions really are so totally
to your
issues. Yes.
comments.
So thank you so much. If anyone has any more questions or comments, we'll hang around a little bit, but we really appreciate your attention, your questions and comments and contributions, and we hope to be in touch with any of you who want to be in touch with us. And I just noticed that my email is wrong. It's missing the C there. I don't know how I managed to delete it or not get it in my email, but I still have a new computer that likes to correct me a lot, so I think it thought I made a typo. But there's a C there if you want to email. Thank you very much. Everyone too.
Presentation.